Okay, so I have a question for you. It sounds like a riddle, but it's really the architecture for everything we're discussing today.
Mhm.
What if the most optimized, the most full and complete version of yourself is actually zero?
Yeah, it is a provocative start. And usually, when we talk about self-improvement, we talk about addition, adding skills, adding habits, adding mindfulness, like it's some sort of plug-in you install on a browser. But the texts we're covering today, they argue that the ultimate system upgrade is actually a process of subtraction.
It's the life-changing magic of tidying up, but for your soul,
Essentially, yeah. But instead of throwing out old socks, you're throwing out the very concept of you.
which is a little more high stakes than the sock drawer. We're diving into some really unique source material today. We're pulling from texts titled Absolute Zero, Returning the Self to Natural Stillness, and also the Zero Equation. And what makes this deep dive so cool, and why I'm so excited, is that these sources take ancient Buddhist philosophy and explain it using, like, the syntax of modern computing,
Mm.
of system architecture.
It is a surprisingly good fit. We tend to put spirituality in one box and, technology in another. But these texts argue that if you want to understand the human mind, don't look at it like a poem. Look at it like a master script or an equation.
Right. And our mission today is to decode that script. We're going to look at how what we call personality is really just data, maybe glitchy data added to a base screen. We're going to look at how different traditions, specifically Theravāda and Mahāyāna, are basically just proposing different ways to handle the math.
And we're going to find out why the save button might actually be your enemy.
I love that. We're hunting for the source code of the self. The text even uses terms like checksum to describe enlightenment, which is just chef's kiss for this audience. But before we get to the solution, we have to map out the problem. The sources lay out something they call the equation of the self. Walk us through the baseline.
Okay, so to understand the equation, you have to understand the default state. The sources posit that the pure mind, the fundamental element of knowing, is naturally equivalent to zero.
Zero. So empty, a void. Because when I hear zero, I think of nothing. And nothing sounds, well, boring.
MD is a loaded word. It sounds nihilistic, like a black hole. But in this context, think of zero as system idle. It's peaceful, it's clear, it's ready. It's the silence in a room before anyone speaks. Or think of a computer screen that's powered on. It's black and humming perfectly, but it hasn't loaded a chaotic desktop yet. That is the variable at the start of the equation.
Okay, so we start at zero, system ready. But obviously we don't stay there. I woke up this morning and immediately started worrying about coffee, emails, and whether I left the stove on.
Exactly. Something enters the system. The texts introduce the Pali term cetasika.
Cetasika. Now, for those who don't speak Pali, in our tech metaphor, these are the apps.
Closely related. Think of cetasika as variables or maybe mental fabrications. These are the factors that run into the mind and cook it up. We're talking about love, anger, memory, greed, kindness. They are executables.
So the mind starts at zero, then the roadrage.exe variable walks in.
Correct. And mathematically, the equation shifts. The mind goes from 0 to, say, +1 if it's anger, or maybe +5 if it's intense euphoria. The specific number doesn't matter as much as the fact that the sum is no longer 0. The system is no longer at rest. It is processing.
Okay, but having an emotion isn't inherently a crash, right? Computers run programs all the time. That's what they're for. If I didn't run programs, I'd just be a brick.
True. But this leads to the next part of the equation, which the source calls vijnana khanda. This is usually translated as the consciousness aggregate, which is a bit dry, a little abstract. But the text uses a really good analogy here that I think solves your concern, the computer screen.
I found this part really helpful because it separates the hardware from the software.
Exactly. So imagine your pure mind is that blank screen. That's the 0. When cetasika, those variables like anger or anxiety enter the system, the screen illuminates, it starts displaying numbers, it displays content. This display, this perception with symptoms is what we usually call consciousness.
This is a huge distinction, though, because usually when I get angry, I think, I am angry. I identify as the anger. But the source is saying, no, the screen is just displaying the data of anger. The screen itself isn't angry. The screen is just pixels firing red.
Precisely. The screen doesn't burn when it displays fire. It doesn't get wet when it displays emotion. It just shows the data. And if that were the end of it, we'd be fine. If the numbers just flashed on the screen and disappeared, the screen would return to 0 naturally. We would experience anger, it would pass, and we'd be back to peace.
But that's not what happens. I dwell on things. I replay the argument I had in the shower 3 days later.
Right. And that is because of the third component to this equation. The texts argue this is the root of all suffering. They call it upadana.
Upadana. The clinging.
Yes. But let's stick to the tech metaphor because it makes the mechanism clearer. Upadana is the glue. Or better yet, it's a hung process. It's the command that prevents the data from clearing the cache.
That makes perfect sense. So anger enters. It flashes on the screen. But instead of letting it fade, Upadana glues it there. It freezes the frame. And I stare at it and say, this is me. I am an angry person. I am right. They are wrong.
Exactly. You are caching the data. Without the glue, the variables are just passing traffic. With the glue, we get stuck believing, I am this number. We build an identity out of temporary cache files. And that, according to the source, is the heavy burden of self. We are walking around carrying a screen full of glued-on, outdated numbers and calling it me.
And the CPU usage goes through the roof.
100% utilization.
Right.
Overheating, the fan is spinning like crazy. That's anxiety, that's stress. We were running processes from 10 years ago. Remember that embarrassing thing I did in high school? And we were keeping that window open in the background, draining battery.
It's like having 50 tabs open in your browser, and you can't find which one is playing the music.
And upadana is the refusal to close the tabs.
So if the problem is that we've cluttered up our screen with all this glued-on data, the solution seems obvious. Clear the cache. Get back to zero. But here is where the source threw me a curveball. I always thought, and I think most people think, that mindfulness or the knower is like a security guard. Like, I need to hire a little guy in my head to watch the screen and catch the numbers.
That is the most common misconception in meditation practice. We try to install a super observer. We think, I need to watch my thoughts. We create a duality, the thinker and the watcher of the thinker. But that watcher is just another program. It's just another variable.
Right, it's superego.exe.
Exactly. The texts offer a profound reframe here. They state that zero is not a knower in the active sense. It is not an agent. It is a checksum. Zero.
Checksum. I love this. For the non-coders, explain what a checksum is.
A checksum is a value used to verify the integrity of a file. When you download a huge file, the computer runs a math check to see if the bits match the original. If the checksum is zero or matches the standard, the file is pure. If it doesn't, the file is corrupted.
So it's a standard of purity.
Right. It's a passive verification. In this context, the source defines the checksum zero as absolute silence. It is the fundamental standard of the universe. It's not a little guy in your head watching thoughts. It is the condition of stillness against which thoughts can be seen.
The source used an analogy about water here that actually clarified the physics of this for me. Because I was struggling with, how can I know something if I'm not trying to know it?
Yes, the physics of knowing. This is crucial. Imagine a surface of water that is perfectly, absolutely still, glassy. That stillness is the zero. Now, if a bug lands on it, that's the contact, or fossa ripple spreads out.
Right.
Now, here's the question. Did the water have to try to see the bug? Did it have to install a camera system? Did it have to wake up and pay attention?
No. The ripple is obvious just because the water was still. The contrast makes it visible.
Exactly. If the water were already boiling or churning, which is our normal state of mind, full of glue and variables, you wouldn't notice the bug at all. You'd just have more chaos. You wouldn't know bug. You would just know agitation.
That is such a good point.
Yeah.
When I'm stressed, I don't even realize I'm snapping at people. The water is boiling, so I can't feel the ripples.
The insight here is that zero, that absolute stillness, is the condition that allows knowing to happen. Knowing arises from the contrast between the stillness and the vibration. The source calls this vijnana-dhatu, or the consciousness element. It's the silence that doesn't change, even when the ripples occur.
So we aren't trying to train a super observer. We are trying to return to the natural state of the water so that the ripples are just evident.
Precisely. You don't do knowing. Knowing happens naturally when you stop doing the ignoring. You stop churning.
It takes the pressure off. I don't have to meditate harder. I just have to stop shaking the ball.
Easier said than done, of course, because we are addicted to the shaking. We think the shaking is who we are.
Well, right, because once we realize that we are essentially just vibrations on top of stillness, we have a strategic choice to make about how to handle the shaking. The texts outline two major ways to handle this equation. And I really liked how the source treats them almost like software patches. You have the Theravāda patch and the Mahāyāna patch.
It's a fair comparison. They are different execution strategies for the same underlying operating system, designed for different user outcomes.
Let's start with strategy A, which aligns with the Theravāda tradition. The source describes this as the path to the absolute silence.
This is the direct approach. It is the most linear solution to the equation.
The force quit approach.
In a sense, yes. The goal here is to stop the centrifugal force of the specific emotions or cravings, the kilesa. If you stop spinning the wheel, eventually the momentum dies down. You stop feeding the inputs. You stop the glue. You actively reject the variables.
And the result?
The stream of consciousness returns to that checksum zero. It is a true extinguishing because no shaker remains. The self returns to being neutral nature. It's efficient, it's logical, and it's final.
It's a factory reset. Wipe the drive.
And for many, that is the ultimate peace. Freedom from the glitching. It is the end of suffering because there is no one left to suffer.
But then we have strategy B, the Mahāyāna approach. The source calls this the bodhisattva way, or the raft. And honestly, looking at the math here, this seems risky. It feels like playing with fire.
It is much more complex, architecturally speaking. In the Mahāyāna strategy, the practitioner realizes that even if they return to zero, the network is still full of noise. There are countless others who are still vibrating, still suffering, still boiling, so they make a conscious choice not to do a total shutdown yet.
They choose to keep the vibration going, intentionally.
To an extent. They choose to keep the soul current active. They intentionally hold on to specific cetasika-specific variables, but instead of greed or anger, they install compassion and wisdom. They use these variables to build a raft.
I see. So instead of just letting all the numbers fade off the screen, they keep the compassion.exe program running so they can interact with other people who are stuck in their own loops.
Correct. You need a program to interact with a program. You need a self to interact with a self. If you are total zero, you are the ocean. You can't really talk to a drowning person. To save them, you need a boat. That boat is the constructed self.
But the source highlights the immense difficulty of this. Remember the glue, upadana?
Yes, the sticky stuff. This is the danger zone.
The risk for the bodhisattva is that the glue will attach to the raft itself. They might start thinking, I am this compassionate savior. Look at me helping people. I am so spiritual.
Oh, that's dangerous. That's the spiritual ego. It's the ultimate trap. If that happens, they are trapped just like everyone else. Maybe even worse, because their trap looks like virtue. They are glued to the raft.
So they have to hold on to these variables without letting the glue set. They have to use the raft or not think they are the raft. That sounds exhausting. That sounds like holding a heavy weight and pretending it's weightless.
It requires a timeline that the source describes as a sankhya.
Which means?
Literally incalculable eons. It's a scale of training that is almost impossible to comprehend. You are maintaining a software construct, a virtual machine of a person, for the sake of others, while constantly fighting the natural urge of the system to claim it as real. It requires infinite patience.
So the destination is the same, right?
Yeah.
Eventually.
Yes. The text is very clear on this, and I think this is important so we don't get lost in sectarian debates. Even for the Mahāyāna path, the ultimate end is to discard the raft. You cannot carry the raft into the final state. Both paths eventually return to Dhammakaya, which represents the state of zero, the eternal stillness. One just takes the scenic, service-oriented route.
It's fascinating because it frames these religious differences not as right versus wrong, but as immediate restore versus delayed restore for the sake of the network.
That connects perfectly to the broader picture the texts paint in the final segment. There is often a criticism of this zero concept, that it sounds like escapism, that nirvana or zero is just running away from the world to hide in a cave and do nothing.
Right, game over. Check it out. A lot of people hear emptiness and think uselessness, or they think it means being a zombie.
But the source reframes this beautifully. It says this process is not about leaving the system. It is about stopping being a disturber of the system.
Oh, I like that. Say more about that.
Think about the water analogy again. A droplet of water often acts like an individual. It has surface tension. It holds its shape. It separates itself from the rest. That surface tension, that's the self. That's the ego holding it together, fighting gravity, fighting evaporation.
And becoming zero, isn't the droplet disappearing into nothing?
No. It is the droplet breaking its surface tension and becoming the ocean. It loses its dropletness, yes, but it gains the vastness of the whole. It didn't lose anything except its limitation.
And this is where the source brings in the Tao, right? I was surprised to see a Taoist concept pop up in a Buddhist analysis, but it fits the physics.
It fits perfectly. The source equates zero with the Tao. The Tao is the flow of nature. It moves, it changes, it responds to causes and factors, but it has no owner. It doesn't have an ego claiming, I am doing this.
So when the mind aligns with zero, It's not that you become a vegetable. You still move. You still respond. You still eat lunch. But you move like the Tao moves naturally without the friction of me.
Precisely. You move according to causes and factors, but without the owner claiming the movement. It's the difference between swimming upstream against the current, which is the self, constantly fighter, constantly exerting effort, and floating perfectly with the current. That floating is the zero.
It sounds effortless, but we are so conditioned to swim upstream. We think if we stop swimming, we'll drown.
When in reality, the swimming is what's exhausting us. The current was always supporting us.
So let's bring this back down to earth for a second, because the reality is most of us listening and us talking right now, we aren't monks. We probably aren't planning to meditate for an asankaya or an incalculable eon. We have jobs. We have stress. We have mortgages. Is there a practical application for the equation of the self for the average user?
Absolutely. You don't have to be aiming for full enlightenment to use the debugging tools.
Right. It's a tool for stress management. When I feel that turbulence in my chest, that anxiety or anger, I can visualize the equation. I can say, okay, the screen is flashing numbers right now. That's just cetasika. That's just a variable.
And crucially, you can look for the glue. You can ask yourself, am I gluing this number to the screen? Do I need to keep this window open? Just noticing the glue often loosens it. You realize that the turbulence is just added data on a base of calm. You are not the turbulence. You are the screen that can eventually return to zero.
It changes the relationship with your own thoughts.
Yeah.
You stop being the victim of your mental software. You stop running every program that pops up. You become, well, you become the admin.
Or better yet, you become the silence behind the admin. You realize the admin doesn't even need to be there for the system to run. The system knows how to run itself.
This has been such a cool journey through these texts. We started with a math problem, how to solve the equation of the self. We looked at the variables that clutter up our mental screen, that sticky glue of attachment, and the misconception that zero is an empty void when it's actually a checksum of perfect integrity.
And we explored how you can choose to restore that integrity immediately or carry a raft to help others, but ultimately we all have to return to that great nature, to that ocean.
It really makes you rethink what it means to be somebody. We spend our whole lives trying to build up this character, this avatar, adding more and more numbers to the screen, better job title, better social media profile, better stories. But the source material is kind of whispering to us that the real power isn't in the typing, it's in the delete key.
It leaves us with a very provocative thought to end on. We are terrified of being nothing. We think zero means we don't matter. But if zero is the state where you stop separating yourself from everything else, where the droplet becomes the ocean, then perhaps becoming nobody is the only way to truly be everything.
That is a lot to mull over. I hope you all take a moment today to find a little bit of that checksum zero amidst the noise. Maybe just clear the screen for a few seconds.
It's always there, waiting for the ripples to settle.
Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll catch you on the next one.
Goodbye.